Hi everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to this event. It's fantastic to come to Barcelona. I've never been here before. So I work for a Cornish company so we're right down on the very southwest of the UK, which meant I had a really long journey to get here because I live about 3 miles from this factory. Our factory in Cornwall, where we build ground source heat pumps, is on top of an old mine. There are a lot of mines in Cornwall, and that means that we're actually able to heat this new building that we've got on the site with water from the mines beneath it, which is actually really quite a cheap way of installing the infrastructure that you need for ground source heat pumps. So the Kenza Group has 4 different companies. We've got our parent company. Kenza Heat Pumps is our manufacturing company. Now, we found, as many other people do, that if you put a heat pump into a house, you get a phone call saying, my heat pump doesn't work. But quite often, the issue is that it's not been designed properly, the system. It's not been installed properly. It's not been commissioned properly. So Kenza Contracting was started so that we could do the design, the installation, and the commissioning, and that our customer had a single point of contact so that if anything goes wrong, they just speak to one person to get it fixed. The upfront cost of ground source heating is incredibly high. Now, we want to reduce the barriers to uptake for this technology, and so Kenza Utilities was formed, and that's the part of the company that I work for. It's been created to fund, own, and maintain the ground array infrastructure that serves our heat pumps, and in that way we grow the market so that we can sell more heat pumps. So Kenza started over 20 years ago. Initially, our market was the self-build market. That's probably very similar to the kind of installations that you have here on a regular basis in Catalonia, where it's individual properties. You've got people with quite a bit of money that care about the environment and that want to have the best heating available. So they install their own system. That's a very small market, and it doesn't help us solve the issues that we have of high carbon consumption. So Kenza then created a very small heat pump that would serve public housing. So houses that are owned by the government, where you've got a single landlord and they have access to finance for upgrading the systems in the houses. And so we've done many projects in small bungalows, and then moving on to whole blocks of flats where we've decarbonised with ground source heating. Following on from that, we're now we've broken into the new build market. So it's quite easy to install this infrastructure before you put the houses up. You've all seen the images of previous presenters showing the ground array infrastructure being installed. It's quite easy to get that in place before the buildings are there, before the road is laid. You can have it all in place. So ground source works really well for new build. But the problem we have is the existing houses in the UK. The UK has 27 million homes that have already been built that will still be here in 2050. And we have to work out how to decarbonise those. And it's much harder. It's more expensive. It's harder to organise. You don't have a single decision maker. You've got lots of individual houses with people with their own income and their own finances, and you have to organise them to all work at the same time. Now I'm just going to cover a few of the different projects that we've actually done. So this was our 3rd or 4th retrofit in high-rise buildings. So in this instance, we've decarbonised these 3 tower blocks. So there are 227 flats across these 3 blocks. And this shows you that it really is possible to decarbonise at scale and in high-density housing. The image on the left here is the actual design of the ground array. So you can see the blue pipes, the blue lines are the horizontal pipes, and the pink dots are the boreholes. And these are all serving that single block on the far left of the site, which I think is called Gooderham House. They're incredibly deep boreholes, these ones. They're well over 200 meters because there's not very much open space and an awful lot of flats. And to give you some idea of the scale, this graphic on the right is actually a to-scale illustration of the depth of the boreholes compared to the height of the property. You know, we talk about 100 meters, 200 meters. It's actually a really, really long way down. Now, inside the building, you can see these, the feeder pipes are separated into 4 different arrays. And that means that we don't have to have central pumping system on these pipes. So it reduces the maintenance cost and the ownership cost to the person that's managing this system. So you don't have to have an electricity supply to pump fluids around those arrays. And it makes the business model for this far more simple. So the blocks of flats are separated into arrays. And you can see here there are 7 shoebox heat pumps, so that's our smallest heat pump, on each floor. That means there are 7 flats on each floor of these 3 blocks, and each array is serving between 4 and 5 floors of the building. Most blocks of flats like this already have service risers, so we don't have to run pipes up the outside of the building. You can use the existing service risers, and we install insulated pipes up the centre of the building. Now, you've heard a lot about not insulating the pipes, and that's great when they're in the ground and they can gather heat. But once you come up out of the ground, if you don't insulate them, you end up with condensation on the pipes within the building, and you don't really want that. So the pipes up the service risers are all insulated. You can also see here on the design, if I can get it to... No, you can't because it won't point at it. But there are 5-way valves on each of these for every single flat, because when we fill these pipes with water, we have to pressurize the whole system. We have to pressure test it to make sure that there aren't any leaks before we switch it on. And it also means that we can isolate each individual section of that network. So if something goes wrong on one floor, it doesn't mean it has to affect all of them. And that's very important when you're looking at this kind of scale of project, because what you don't want is for the whole system to go down and to have 300 people without heat instead of 2. So inside the house, this is images from this block of flats on the right here. That's our very small shoebox heat pump. It's a lot bigger than an actual shoebox, but it does genuinely fit under a kitchen sink. And that's really important when you're looking at high-density housing where space is a premium. On the right, the image is the shoebox heat pump underneath a phase change heat battery. So this is the heat battery on the right here is in place of a hot water cylinder, but it's about 1/3 of the size. So instead of using water for energy storage for your bath and your shower, it uses salt, which means that it can hold a lot more heat in a much smaller space. And again, it's really vital for smaller properties where space is expensive. So this is the project in numbers, 273 flats across 3 blocks. That's a huge number of people that had their living conditions improved. These flats previously had electric storage heaters. So the people living in these houses have had their energy bills cut by more than half. And these are all lower income households, and that means we're taking them out of fuel poverty. They can actually afford to turn their heating on now, where many of them didn't before. Also, storage heaters, you have to remember to charge it at night to release heat in the day. It's not heat on demand. They can run out of heat, and so we had people that were cold in the evening. We know every single person in these blocks of flats is going to be able to have heat when they want it. There are 109 boreholes serving these flats. That's a very large amount, nearly 29 kilometres of drilling. The whole project is being done in 9 months, which is a fantastic feat of engineering. I think that's probably one of the most impressive parts of this project. And it'll save the residents £500 a year. And that is different to the way you would see it here. Our energy costs are higher than you have it in Catalonia, but it's still, it's a reduction in of over 50% to each of those households, which is £136,000 across the 3 tower blocks. And this is just to bring it back to the fact that these are real people that have their lives improved. We've talked a lot about the engineering and why we might want to do it and why we might want to save the planet. And these are the actual people that are now able to heat their house and that couldn't before. We have them report that it's easy to use, it keeps their house warm, and it's much cheaper than the old system that we had. This is from a new build development that we did, where we installed passive cooling in a property and a monitoring system to see how that behaved. So with passive cooling, you're just using the ground to cool the property. You're not using a heat pump. You're not switching the heat pump on to do this. It looks like a very complex diagram. It's actually incredibly simple. We've got the heat pump. That's not working at all. We've got the heat pump down here on the bottom right, and then a heat exchange unit to the right of that. And that's the only thing that we need in place to cool the system, to cool the house. So we monitored this house between July and October last year, and it was through 2 heat waves, which won't sound very hot to you, but for us in England, it was incredibly hot. And it was at 32 degrees outside. Now, most homes in England don't have any cooling, so that is really quite warm. The room that we installed the cooling in was maintained at 21 degrees Celsius, and that's without turning the heat pump on. That's just using the ground and dumping the heat in the borehole. And this is the unit that you require. This is just a plate heat exchanger on the bottom, a circulation pump for the ground side, and a circulation pump for the domestic side. It's ridiculously simple. So the running costs for a single room were £1.40 a day. To put that into perspective, if you were to cool the same room with air conditioning, it would be £4.25. So it's about a quarter of the price. And the reason for that is that all you're doing is running 3 pumps, 3 motors rather. You've got these 2 circulation pumps, and then you've got the fan coil unit. That's the only energy it requires. If you were to cool the whole house over this period, it would have been £378 with this model, and £1,409 if you used air conditioning. The benefit of this as well is that you dump the heat into the ground, and so when you run heating in your home, when you create domestic hot water, you're actually getting that much cheaper, because your heat pump will be able to run more efficiently because it's doing less work to upgrade that heat when it comes in, because you've warmed the ground. The other benefit is it's about a quarter of the carbon as well. So your impact on the environment is far lower if you're using passive cooling compared to air conditioning. A little bit more about the business models. So you can see from the passive cooling how that would be appealing to homeowners. It really helps us to sell this technology, that it's lower cost, so it's more desirable. And this is really what we're trying to do to expand into that market. The next biggest thing that we can do is to stop selling our customers this infrastructure in the ground. So up until now, Kenza Contracting has been selling the whole system to landlords and to developers and just handing it all over. If we remove that bit of it, if we absorb the upfront cost and then charge households for connection, it makes it easier for these projects to go ahead. So our vision, and we haven't called it Thermonet, we call it we call it networked heat pumps, which I'm not convinced it's the best name for it, because people tend to want to be their own little castle. They don't want to be connected to other people and at risk of failing along with them. They want to be independent. So I kind of think calling it networked heat pumps makes them feel part of something that they probably don't want to be a part of. So we do particularly want an individual heat pump in each home, and that's why we have such small heat pumps available on the market. It's mimicking the gas network. Now that's very important for us in the UK, because currently in the UK, 85% of homes are heated with natural gas through the gas network. So people are very familiar with that model. They don't want to change. And we don't want to make it seem difficult to them. So if we replace one network with another, it's quite familiar. The Kenza Utilities is selling split ownership infrastructure. So Kenza Utilities will own the infrastructure up to the point it connects with the building. And that reduces the upfront cost by 30 to 40%, depending on what market we're working in. It creates an opportunity for private investment. So instead of relying on government subsidies, which change annually, we can actually create a longer-term business model and more stability in our business by using pension funds and other investors. So, yeah, 85% of the UK homes are used to this kind of setup. They own the boiler in their house, they connect it to the gas network, they don't care how it works, they just have a lot of heat. They don't care if it's particularly efficient, because it's always been really cheap. We want to do the same thing, but with a low carbon alternative. Now at the moment it is expensive, but we expect that to come down as the momentum increases, as the market grows, and you know, having more drillers, more installers, this cost is going to come down. The other thing that we're doing is, unlike a high temperature heat network, there is no heat metering. So we don't have to have that additional piece of equipment in the house to measure how much heat they're using, and that reduces our cost for administering the whole system. It also reduces the complexity. So this is a very simple business model. The cost that we charge is a flat rate standing charge. So the household knows what their bills are going to be, and we don't change that. And the purpose of that standing charge is just to repay the capital investment. So it's simple. Everything that we're doing is to try and keep this simple. Right now, we're not even particularly looking at introducing more waste heat into this system. It's complicated and difficult enough to get simple systems like this off the ground. We're just doing boreholes, we're just doing a flat rate standing charge, and we're bringing in the private investment to do that. And this now is the project that I spend most of my working week on. It's called Heat the Streets, and it's been part funded by the European Regional Development Fund. In this project, we're installing 100 heat pumps across 5 different sites in Cornwall. All of those are with split ownership. Every single customer is paying us a monthly standing charge to use our infrastructure, and we have installed a heat pump in their house that they own. They can change their electricity provider, they can manage their own heating costs. We're also installing the infrastructure for future connections. And this is what it looks like across the markets that we're working with on Heat the Streets. Now, bear in mind that these costs are heavily subsidised by the funding that we've got. In new build, the developer gets ground source heating for the price of air source, because the equipment in the house is very similar. We haven't got an external unit, and they're not paying for the infrastructure. So you get to, we get cost parity with air source, which is a big deal in the UK. For social housing retrofit, that's our public housing. Again, it's ground source for the price of air source. The standing charge is really low. And for private retrofit, we charge no upfront cost. So they haven't paid for anything at all. And then they pay us £25 a month for the infrastructure. That won't work in the future. It's only because we've got this really high grant funding at the moment that we can do that. In the future, we would expect a private household to pay something towards the installation in their house. And why would they do it? So for new build developments, it reduces their upfront cost without increasing the cost of running the system to the household. So you get a more attractive heating system. You don't have an ugly box in the garden. We haven't messed around with the pricing, so to make it harder for them to sell the houses later. In social housing, the social housing landlord isn't responsible for infrastructure, which to them makes their job much easier. They don't really want to be responsible for maintaining infrastructure serving their properties. And for private housing, the upfront cost barrier is removed, and they don't then have to go and try and navigate the low carbon heating market. They don't have to work out, is hydrogen coming? Is an air source heat pump better? Who do I go to? Who's going to install it? And we found those are in fact the biggest barriers in the households that we looked into in this project. And on the right here, the three different models of heat pump that Kenza builds. We've got the shoebox, which does flats and small houses. The Evo, which will do really quite large buildings. And then that really big one there is for non-domestic buildings. And you can cascade these heat pumps as well, the bigger ones. So if you have a higher heat or cooling demand than these can provide, you can have several of them in series. And this is the really fascinating bit about this project. So you've seen in the presentations earlier today, people talk about borehole fields. Well, we've worked in an area here where there isn't a space to do that. Instead of using a borehole field, we're installing the boreholes in the road. Now, there aren't many places that don't have a road, so there aren't many places that you can't decarbonise. The video on the left is just a few clips of the works. So we're trenching all around the estate. As you can see, this is the housing estate here. Each of those red dots is a connection for a house. And each of the blue dots is, the black crosses, each of those is a borehole. So we've had to work around the existing utilities that are in the highway. We had to get planning permission to do this. The local authority was really worried we would freeze the road. We're really not going to freeze the road. During delivery of this project, we will install 20 ground source heat pumps in this estate, and there'll be 40 connections in place for the rest of the houses to join up to it later on when their heating system breaks. And that is really what we think is going to be the future of Thermonet in the UK. So exactly like our current utilities, you install it in the road, you put a connection in place, and then when your heating system breaks, you can put in a new one and connect it to that network. The biggest part of work that we've had to do on Heat the Streets is actually creating the operational parts of the business that were required to deliver this. So we have to have a set of legal agreements in place so that we can protect our income on this asset through the future. We had to set up customer accounts and billing systems, and none of this was part of the Kensa business model before. So it really has been a huge amount of work. Gaining permission to work in the road has been difficult. We had to install temperature sensors in the road at various depths so that we can report back to the council that we are not freezing the road. I actually think that's going to be quite an interesting study that people are going to be keen to see, because we talk about the flow temperature in the infrastructure and the temperature of the brine, but we don't often look at the temperature effect at various distances from the infrastructure. So we're going to have quite a lot of data come out of this project. We are not regulated in this industry in the UK, but we're joining a voluntary regulating body called the Heat Trust, and that is just a way to promise to people what they can expect from this, which is important when people are unfamiliar with the technology. They shouldn't need to understand it inside out. There should just be protections in place so that they can trust you to do a good job. And since we've started this project, we've been able to sell this business model to new build developments. So that's within a period of 18 months, it's gone from the valley of death and into a commercial offer. Now, I would say the private retrofit market is still pretty much in the valley of death. It's very new. I'm planning a second demonstration project to show willingness to pay from consumers. So that's the one serious thing that Heat the Streets was missing. This is the offer that we have to new build. So that in this we can compare what it would cost if you had gas, air source or ground source for your new build project. And we can show that the standing charge doesn't make it unappealing. It's a very kind of similar ownership cost. And again, back to the actual people that were involved in this. This is Jackie with her Evo heat pump. All of the customers reported there was less disruption. So this is in retrofit, and I'm sure it's the same here. You keep getting told it's too disruptive. People won't take it. They won't like it. It costs too much money. People will put up with the disruption as long as they know what to expect and how long to expect it for. And we're digging up the road and drilling holes in front of their houses. It is a disruptive process. We had to remove all of the radiators from their houses and replace them with larger ones. Half of them have already reported energy bill savings, and all of them said that it was a better heating system than they previously had. And this is another crucial issue is every one of these had to sign a 20-year service agreement with us. And we were told that people wouldn't do that because it would make it too hard to sell their house. We've already had 30 homeowners sign that 20-year service agreement. 60% were comfortable with it and 40% were ambivalent. Nobody was saying that that was a big barrier to signing up. 80% have said that they'd be happy to pay an upfront contribution to the internal works, and that's what I'm relying on for my next project. And this is just a short video interview with one of the people that's receiving a heat pump in Collins Park, where we're working in the road.
When we had the opportunity of Heat the Streets in our village, we knew that actually that was the system that we would dream about owning, but we didn't have the spare cash to be able to buy it. That was our dream system, and when this came along, it was an easy yes to get involved with it, because ultimately that's what we would have loved to have been able to afford all by ourselves. So we're delighted. I'm looking forward to getting rid of my oil tank, which is I look out of my window at from my lounge. So I'm looking forward to getting rid of that and knowing that the ground source heat pump is going to be installed and it's going to really complement the solar that we have. It's just going to be a really big leap to reducing our carbon footprint, and I think that's really important for our future.
And I'd just like to end that with saying it seems like a really difficult problem, and it is. But if you have an organisation that will run these projects, that will get the funding, that will organise the households to all work together, it is possible, and you can do it, even in high-density housing areas. There's always a way, and I think we've really shown that by just drilling into the road. So thank you very much.